Webster's dictionary defines pornography as writing or pictures, etc., intended primarily to arouse sexual desire. Pornography also arouses some pretty big bucks, with reported sales continuing to climax somewhere around a whopping $10 billion a year. So now, folks, somebody we know likes pornography. Whether we like it or not, whether we know they're looking at it or not, somebody likes pornography. The question that we want to talk about today is, does a country that sells sex sell souls? We've got some people on this show today who call pornography sexual slavery. You're also going to meet some of the most successful penthouse pets who say it's freedom of expression. Today on Rolonda, join us. We're going to talk about pornography. Images of nude women, you can't get away from them. I mean, they're everywhere. In some cities, it's hard to even walk down the street or pass a newsstand without being bombarded by explicit pictures of naked women.
The easier and more acceptable it is for a man to look at a picture of a woman or an image of a woman on a video and gain sexual satisfaction from that and masturbate to that or get off on that image, the easier it is for him to carry that over into his real-life relationships and not care about the woman as a person, just an image, just something to get off with.
I think they should have more porno films, you know, and more places where they can get some more magazines, because a lot of guys ain't lucky enough to get a girlfriend, so that's why they got porno places and they got video places, so the guys that can't get a girlfriend, can't get a girl, they go in there and they get off or whatever the case may be, you know, but that's the way I feel about it.
Well, now we're seeing even more familiar faces, like Diane Parkinson, the sweet little hostess from The Price is Right. And look, there's Patty Davis, the President Reagan's daughter, former president, that is. And in a recent story that even shocked New York City, one of its finest, Carol Shia, climbed out of her police uniform and onto the pages of Playboy magazine, giving New York's finest a whole new meaning. Her posing nude not only raised eyebrows, it also raised a lot of questions, particularly from other women on her force. I want you to meet two of them. Karen Creason is the president of the Patrol Women's Endowment Association, and Sheenan Francis is a police officer in the same precinct as Carol Shia. I also want you to meet Sabella Borges. She's a sergeant from New York City on the police department, who more than a decade ago got an awful lot of flack over some nude pictures of her own. I'd like to thank all three of you ladies for joining us today. Sabella, before we get to your story, because I remember covering your story about 12 years ago. Yes. Well, before we get to that story, let's start with you ladies on the most recent revelation, I guess you would say. What has the response been on the police force since Carol Shia came out in Playboy?
Well, every response that I have gotten, I've gotten numerous phone calls, I've gotten letters written to me by members of the Police Women's Endowment Association, I've spoken to many males on the police department, and I have gotten nothing but negative remarks about what she did. That they feel that it was not something of a positive image for the police department, and that basically she has taken the women back 10 years in things that we have fought very hard and longed for and struggled to get.
Mm-hmm. Sheenan, what exactly have you heard? Sheenan, with a name like Rolonda, Sheenan. I'm going to make sure I pronounce your name correctly. Okay. But Sheenan, exactly what are they saying? What specifically are they upset about?
Okay, I work in the same precinct as Officer Shia Castro, and we've had incidents where carloads of guys drive by as we're changing tours and getting ready to go out on patrol, and they're screaming out very derogatory things to us. We've had
things like what?
You're going to get what you deserve, you're a bunch of whores. Things like that.
So what I hear you saying is the whole precinct has suffered.
Yes.
Particularly women, or the guys on the force too are getting some heat?
No, it's particularly women. The women, specifically in the 4-5 precinct, if they have to go out of the command, they are now taking off their collar brass so that they don't have to show the 4-5 numerals, so that no one knows, because they have not only the public, but they have other male cops pushing each other out of the way just to get a look.
To see if that's
her.
her.
To see if that's her.
Is that her?
Exactly.
I hear that when you go out on the beat sometimes, responding to a call, that they say, why didn't you send the one from Playboy?
Absolutely.
Exactly. That's one of the things that I deal with and other people that in the 4-5 deal with. But the only problem is the officer from Playboy is not going out on patrol. She does not go out on patrol. So we're the ones that are going out, and we're the ones that are dealing, and we're suffering the repercussions of what she did. And that's where it's not fair.
Come on.
She's in the public eye. What did she expect? What does she expect is going to happen? I don't understand. She posed after she was a police officer, correct?
Right.
But if you're in a public eye like that, I don't understand. I mean, she deserves what she gets as far as that goes. I don't think that she should do that in her position.
Right. Oh, no.
She's not the one that's getting the
She's
flack
not
from it.
suffering.
Well, then there
We're
should be, even before you even, if this is your career that you choose, then that I mean, I don't know, against your constitutional rights, whatever it says, but I just think that there should be some stipulation that you shouldn't
Now,
be
you
allowed
from
to
New
do that.
York?
Yes, Westchester County.
Okay. Now, when you found out that one of your finest had posed in Playboy,
I would be offended by it. I just am offended by it.
who else agrees with that? I hear some people who don't necessarily agree. I hear you shaking your head here. I just wonder how people in New York City felt when this came out that one of your police officers had posed. What was your? Saw you shaking your head there. Come on, stand up, talk to me.
Well, I felt that it was degrading to women, and I felt that because I'm a registered nurse myself, and I couldn't see posing nude and then going in front of my patients and they're saying, oh, so you're the one with the boobs or whatever that I saw in the magazine, And I felt it was very derogatory to women. I really did.
How have the other women, thank you so much, how have the other women in the precinct responded to, I mean, how has the sisterhood been in the precinct since then?
Well, I think basically in all the precincts it's the same thing as it is in the 4-5.
And that is what?
Negative response to Carol Shire.
Nobody has come and been supportive of her?
Where is she? Where's Carol now?
We asked Carol to come on this show. And she went back and forth and finally decided that she didn't want to do it. But let me introduce to you Sabella Borges. Now, I remember this big one. Boy, 12 years ago, did this lady make it? Do you guys remember this? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, your story was a bit different because, you tell us why.
Well, when I took the pictures, I was not a police officer. I did not use my shield or my uniform to further my career, whatever that career was going to be. I did it during the lowest point in my life, and the pictures were taken way before I became a police officer.
So then you become a police officer, and these pictures surface, and boom, boy, what did you go through?
I went through hell and back. I mean, I was treated by the New York City Police Department like the worst criminal in the world. I started telling them that they were on a witch hunt trial. Salem, Massachusetts, they were just crucifying me to the wall. The difference between me and Carol is that I had the support of the Police Women's Endowment Association. Plus, I had the support of just about everybody, city, citizens, police officers, everybody.
Yeah, Sabella, how did you get support and Carol's getting slammed?
Because I think it was different. I did not use my uniform. I did not call up Playboy and say, listen, I'm a police officer, so can I pose? Because if that wasn't used, I don't think she would be on the magazine.
Is that a difference for you ladies?
I think it absolutely is. She is in photos in the pictorial, and she's portraying the tools and the tasks that we do in a very difficult job that we have to do every single day, and I think that's a very big difference.
Sabella, what do you think about this? When you read in the papers, here was this police officer who'd bared it all, what was your first reaction?
I said, here it goes again. I took off the next day because I knew I was going to get massive phone calls from all the news media.
Yeah, well, didn't you get thrown off the force?
Yes, I did.
And you fought to get reinstated.
Yes, I did.
And you did, and she is now a sergeant, I will have you know. So, Sergeant Borges, let me ask you this. How did you live it down? I mean, what do you foresee Carol going through?
you live it down by proving them all wrong. You live it down by being a good cop, by going out into the street, doing actual patrol, rolling around in the gutter with guys, fighting, getting hurt, getting hit, getting your life threatened, getting your guns pointed at you. That's how you live it down. You prove them wrong, you move up like I did. I worked in street narcotics, I worked in anti-crime, I went up to the robbery identification unit, I became a detective, and then I became a sergeant. That's how everybody gets to know that she's a good cop, nothing else interfered with what she did in her past life.
Now, what about those who say, look, all the lady did was just go pose? I mean, what does that have to do with her job as a police officer?
I feel that if you want, she's an adult, and if she wanted to pose, that's fine. Leave the job out of it. You can go and pose. It's just like being a doctor. It's just like being anything else. I mean, you can go and pose, but you don't have to bring the job and everyone from the job and bring them into it.
Audience, let me ask you this, just in yes and no's. Do you think that the cop was right to do this? No. Any yeses? All right, where the debate continues. We're going to talk about that, about what you think, because we get an overwhelming no, she shouldn't have done it, and we get a few yeses in there too. So we'll continue this debate. We're also, when we come back, going to talk to two hot and highly successful penthouse pets. They say if men want to fantasize and masturbate to their photographs, it's just fine with them. They say, let us entertain you. Next. Have been talking about all that controversy caused by a New York City police officer who recently posed nude, and a lot of us have been talking about pornography lately because of that. One of the things that we talked about before we left was a lot of people in here were against this police officer and what they did. And tell me somebody who was against. Why? I know that you had said something about it.
Yeah, I think she used the uniform for her own personal gain. I don't agree with what Sabella Borges had done either, but she did it before she was a police officer. And once you're a police officer, you shouldn't use the uniform for your own benefit. And I think she was an opportunist, and she used it for her own gain.
What we call pornography, and you call it whatever you want, it's up to your own opinion. Our next two guests call it a job. I want you to meet Gina LaMarca. She's an exotic dancer. She's also a former penthouse pet, and she starred in several Penthouse videos. I also want you to meet Lee Anderson. She's the Penthouse pet for their upcoming silver anniversary issue. Ladies, we'd like to welcome both of you. Thank you. Now, a lot of people were shocked when they heard the story about the police officer who goes nude, and everybody starts talking about pornography back and forth. When you guys heard the story, what was your reaction?
Actually, I met Gina, the police officer, shortly after she took the photos, and she was under the impression that she would be fired as soon as it hit the stand. And this was going to catapult her into bigger and better things.
You know, let's focus on bad publicity is always the best publicity. We never hear of anything that goes over good. So I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she used the uniform. Because that's the point.
That's right. Look at all y'all knew that, didn't you?
That's right. So, I mean, what she did wasn't wrong. I mean, I feel that in the rules, even I do a police officer in my set. And it just, to guys, that they just go wild. But I'm not allowed to use certain things like a police uniform that's used on a job.
I feel sorry for the ladies here because they're suffering for that. I mean, she got on Howard Stern, a nationally listened to talk show, and said, this is my beat, this is where I'll be, you can come down and see me. I mean, that was really, I think.
So let me ask you, as ladies, did that disgust you?
No.
No.
Disgust me, no. I'm a consenting adult. What I did was for my choice, and I considered who in my life this would affect. And the only reason I considered not posing for the magazine was out of the respect that I have for my boyfriend's mother, who's extremely religious. But I made my own choices, and I feel comfortable with myself and who it's affected.
Let me ask you this. For people who say pornography is ruining this nation, it is blowing every little piece of morality we've got left, what do you say? I mean, what tool does pornography play? And I mean, do we need it?
It's adult entertainment. It's entertainment for an adult. I think you have the right to either look at it or don't. It comes in plastic. It's not pushed on anyone who doesn't want to look at it.
The fact of the matter is, sex sells absolutely everything, from cars to toothpaste to, you name it, turn on the television and their sex is. It's a marketing tool. It depends on simply how it's used. There are many
And how
different
you
levels
respect yourself.
and a range of it.
Here's a question from the audience. Yes.
I think Karen Shea has a right to pose nude, and if her boss fires her, she could stand up for her right to get her job back.
Well,
Like in the Give Me a Break episode, where Carl Kanifsky fired Mary Beth for posing nude.
Oh, that's fantasy. Now, the reality is...
well, it's the uniform I think they're going for. It's not the point that she posed nude, because to each his own, and she has a right to pose nude if she wants to. It's the point of her using the uniform.
Okay, all right. Is that was the point that the ladies were making, Jeanette?
That uniform represents me and my fellow sister and brother officers.
But when the guys, and when you said when the guys had told you, you know, you're going to get yours, I don't think they meant about her posing nude. I think they meant because you're a cop and they don't like cops. I don't think they said.
You a whore.
I don't know. I hear teenagers all the time that hate cops.
Well, what they're saying, well, what I understand is that it's tough enough being a cop on the beat, period.
Right.
And then to be a woman on the beat, and
wait a minute, since you were not there to know why they said it to us, when you answer that telephone switchboard and you hear, I want to report my car stolen and send over the cop with the big boobs that posed in Playboy, I mean, let's be real.
Yes,
okay?
But you're going to get yours, you whore, has nothing to do with her posing nude.
Yes, it did, because it didn't start until after these pictures hit the...
Oh, God. I
Okay?
know teenagers
And like
that
you said,
hate
it's
cops.
adult entertainment. And yes, it is. But when it's on the newspapers, when it's in the middle of your Sunday newspaper, and your child brings that newspaper in, your child is going to see that. And cops have always been something that children should look up to. Children should go to for help.
It doesn't question how well she's
let's continue this, because I really want to know if you had these same thoughts about pornography before this hit your precinct. Hold on, don't answer it yet. Also in the show, we're going to talk to a sex therapist who's going to help us understand something that, well, I guess it affects many different things in our life, but once again, men and women thinking differently about a subject, and that is pornography. We're also going to ask the question, does pornography lead to hatred and violence against women? Serial killer Ted Bundy said it does.
Pornography that deals on a violent level with the sexuality is that once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material.
You know, we've already talked about how pornography, I mean, $10 billion, an estimated $10 billion in sales of pornography a year, and you might not even know this, but there are more than 100 different sex magazines in the United States. That according to the National Directory of Magazines. And Norma Ramos is one person who wants to see every one of those magazines off the shelf. She is the General Counsel for Women Against Pornography. Welcome. What is the biggest problem that people in your group or Women Against Pornography have with this form of expression?
Well, actually, our goal isn't to see every one of the magazines off the shelf. Our ultimate goal is to see the end of the sexual exploitation of women and children. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the struggle and movement in this country, the feminist movement against pornography, is a struggle that actually understands that pornography isn't expression. It is a system of prostitution that actively undermines the safety and status of all women. And it was very interesting to listen to the police officers in the earlier segment talk about the impact that the one officer posing in Playboy has on undermining their status as police officers. It's exactly what we know. We know that pornography undermines women's equality, because what pornography is the subordination of women done in a sexual context, where women are reduced to things, to basically sex objects, sex toys for men.
Now, Norma, I know there's somebody out there going, what's wrong with renting a little movie? You know?
It's a nice little speech.
Just a little.
What does it take to put a human being in that position? What does it take? It takes tremendous degradation of a human being. That is done at a cost. There's a whole class of human beings that have to be available to be exploited in that way. I'm talking about the human dignity, and I'm also talking about people being vulnerable to the pimps and pornographers who make those
Actually,
movies.
I think Cindy Crawford is perhaps one of the most dignified models in the market today. She's on the cover of Vanity Fair this month, posing totally nude. This is a woman who makes millions of dollars every year. I don't think she's lowering herself to anyone.
Just because you're a successful person as a woman doesn't mean that what we've learned about the women in pornography is that many of them come from situations where they were sexually assaulted in childhood. What we say is that women who appear in pornography, people say, well, that's choice. What feminists say, and what those of us that struggle against exploitation of women say, it's really a function of lack of choice. And very often, these women have been sexually assaulted in childhood, which renders them vulnerable to the pimps and pornographers.
Now, Lee, Gina, was that your
as do
women
women who are incredibly outspoken as you are, suffer from a great deal of sexual abuse and neglect as a child. Okay, so we're looking from your extreme to another extreme. Just as there are many different
And there are
variations.
many women and people who do not want to perpetuate the abuse. They want to end the abuse. And what I'm saying is it's not to blame the women in it. They are not the ones that we are against. It's not the women who are being used in pornography. We are against the pimps and pornographers that exploit women and actually then produce materials that socialize men to have contempt for women and to see women as appropriate objects for abuse.
Let me ask you this, Gina and Lee, when you perform in clubs as exotic dancers, when your new spread comes out, do you ever feel the object a toy, be abused in any way?
I choose exactly what situation I want to be in. It's my choice. If anyone's a feminist, it's us, because we're choosing exactly what we want to do and how we want to do it. I choose what I do with my money.
I'm an extremely committed. I'm an extremely committed, loving relationship. My boyfriend is a 4-time world champion prize fighter. Yeah. Okay. And that's
these guys over here like that.
Yeah,
Vinny, we're going to get to you in just a minute. Hold on.
I do this for my own sexual satisfaction and enjoyment. Not to mention the fact that I make an exorbitant amount of money.
And I'm raising a 2-year-old by myself that probably a lot of people couldn't do, and give him the things that I can give him.
Boarding school is extremely expensive.
Yeah, hold on. I understand you all are also saving for college educations right now off of this. Hold on 1 second here. Question.
I think you're trapped in the system. Like people that go on welfare, they're not really smart and getting money out of the government. I think you become trapped to this. I mean, you're both...
What do you do for a living?
It's none of your business.
Well, then, you're I'm trapped in absolutely nothing.
I'm only
one at a time. Go on,
old.
Gina.
I mean, you have to take your money and invest it. I'm going to be able to retire before a lot of people are able to retire. I'm going to be able to send my child to the best college and give him everything that I possibly can.
But let me ask you, but do you see,
education.
But do you guys see how people feel about it? They look at these things and they think you're being...
This is what makes nothing to me when she compares me to someone trapped in welfare. I think she's an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Question here.
Well, I think it's really important to look at who's really profiting from pornography, and it's not women. The people who are really profiting are pimps like the major pornographers that we're talking about. And to give you an example, yes, I use the word pimp. I'm a lawyer, and I wrote a friend of the court brief in a case where a former penthouse pet sued Bob Guccione for sexual harassment. The court found him guilty of sexual harassment, and the form of sexual harassment that he was found guilty of was pressuring her, using his power as her employer, to pressure her into having sex with other people for his business advantage. This is what pornography is really all about.
She was a weak person
it's about the pimping, the exploitation, the selling of women. That's what it's about. And who's making the money? You may be making a little bit of money, but who's making a whole lot of money?
I probably make more than you do.
Guccione,
okay? Not a little bit of money.
We'll let you continue.
I'm doing something I love to do. I love it, and I would do it
okay, hold
if
on
I
one
didn't
second.
make
Hold
money
on. We're going to
out of it.
continue with this. I know we had a question that we also posed to some of the officers about what you thought about pornography before and after the incident. Vinny, we're going to get to you to see what it's like to be a man who's dating a woman in pornography. We also have a warning from another woman who's going to join us. She reminds us that you can actually become addicted to pornography. She's going to tell us how she lost her husband to that very addiction as soon as we get back. We'll be right back.
together for almost 3 years.
Hi, folks. I want you to meet Vinny. Vinny is Lee's boyfriend. And when you see that your girlfriend is into Playboy and Penthouse, you don't feel that she's looked at as an object by other men?
Well, yeah, I know that she's looked at as an object, but, you know, I really don't have a problem with it. See, nudity in this country is a lot more harsh than it is in, you know, overseas. It's no big deal at all. But, you know, when I hear some of the talk that's going on, and some of it's wrong, you know, the therapist up there, whatever she may be, a lot of it's wrong. You know, Lee's father owns an aviation company. She was a private eye in Florida. I have a ton of money that, you know, she don't need to work. She's putting her kid through school. She's making a lot of money. To me, you know, I don't mind what she's doing at all. I know
And you don't
it's a
think
job.
it's demeaning?
It's not demeaning the way that I look at it. If it's demeaning to some people, see, the thing that I look at it as, you don't want to look at a magazine, you don't want to buy a magazine, you don't want to buy a movie, you just don't buy it. Nobody's forcing you. Nobody's breaking your arm to buy it.
That alone could put the people out of business.
I think that we have to look at what does it mean in a society that in order for women to put their children through school, in order for women to make money, that they have to take their clothes off. I think that we need to look at that.
I'll get to it.
And I think if we say we're committed to the equality of women, then we have to actually question that the whole rules of that game.
Question here.
I think by and large, the pornography industry is an industry that's patriarchal, it's male-dominated, and it mostly profits off of the exploitation of women. But I wanted the director, or I don't know, you're involved with the National Coalition for Women Against Pornography. I think you need to be careful when you say that feminists oppose pornography, because there's a growing number of feminist filmmakers who are making pornography from the point of view of women.
Okay. What do you think?
Well, I was talking about the feminist anti-pornography movement, and I know that there are women who are making pornography, but actually they receive tremendous backing from the male-dominated pornography industry.
But doesn't it make you feel a bit better? I mean, no, you're totally
No,
against
that's a
this
marketing
stuff.
strategy. The pornographers are doing whatever they can to get an ever-increasing larger market. They've expanded into computer pornography. It's simply a strategy on the part of the pornographers to increase their profits, to say, well, a woman made this. But the pornography really pretty much is the same. It's still the exploitation of women. It still reduces women to a collection of body parts and teaches men that women are sex toys available to them, and that will undermine, of course, the equality for all women.
Let me bring Valerie in here, folks. I'd like you to meet Valerie. Valerie lost a husband to addiction. This may be an extreme story, but I'd like you to listen to this. Valerie, welcome, and tell us how addiction to pornography played such a pivotal thing in your life.
About 17 years ago, I married a man who had an addiction, and I didn't know it. And we were married for about 3 months, and we were moving, and I found a box of porn underneath the bed, stashed away. And I was really surprised because I had no idea that this was going on. And when I asked him about it, he said that he didn't need it. He just looked at it, that there's no big deal. So he took it out in the backyard and he burned it. And I thought that was it. And then over the next few years, I found him going into the adult businesses to look at the movies, and I kept finding more magazines. And for me as a woman, it was devastating. You know, being a newlywed, I wondered what was wrong with me that would cause my husband to want this. Wasn't I enough? I couldn't understand what was going on. And so when I found him in one of the adult businesses, I went for counseling, and the person I chose was my pastor. And when I went to him, he told me it was my fault.
The pastor told you it was your fault.
And he told me...
Now, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Somebody else's addiction is your fault.
Well, this was 17 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, and people weren't looking at it as an addiction.
But wait a minute. I mean, everybody in here reacted. But to be honest with you, our research shows that women who are going through this difficult thing with a husband or a mate being addicted don't talk about this. Right. It's embarrassing to say, my husband. Is that the type of thing that you felt as well?
It was certain my ex, not addicted, but it bothered me because he was kind of choosing, yes, magazines and pornography over me in our personal life. Like when I would be home, he would want to go to the strip clubs, and I was like, well, I'm there all the time. I want to be home, and you know, he couldn't understand that. So I can't. So there is.
First of all, I'd like to say from before that these women are bright. I mean, they're making more money doing what they're doing in a free country than we would make even on Wall Street.
I worked as an accounts payable, so I know.
Yeah.
And second thing, I can't see why your husband would look, anywhere else. You're
That's what I couldn't
beautiful
understand.
lady.
But you know what? It's not her fault. It's not anyone's fault. Right. It's something that stems back to his child. It's something that came out of what he was before.
Let's continue this talk about addiction to pornography, because you were bringing up a lot of different issues here. One is how a woman feels when she finds that a man is looking at an awful lot of pornography. And I want you to continue your story, because when your husband had to make a choice,
that's right,
he chose death, and we're gonna talk about that. It goes to one extreme to the other. Also, when we come back, we're gonna bring in that sex therapist, I promise you. She's gonna tell us why many things that turn men on turn women off. Once again, differing on subjects, this time pornography. We'll be right back. Continue our debate over pornography. Let me introduce to you first Dr. Teresa Crenshaw. She is a sex therapist who counsels couples on addiction to pornography. Before we come to you, Dr. Crenshaw, we were just finishing a story that it's really an unbelievable story about addiction that Valerie's husband faced. An addiction that led him to death. How did this come? I understand he committed suicide. How did things get so bad? You left off talking about the priest had said it was your fault.
Right.
And continue.
Okay, so because I felt it was my fault, that I was to blame for his addiction, I went out and bought some marriage books and tried to do everything I thought I needed to do. I did everything it said, from wrapping yourself in the cellophane to, being available anytime. I thought that maybe if I did what I thought he needed, then he would need the pornography, but it didn't help. And then in 1980, when the VCRs became real popular, he went out and bought one so he could bring the movies home so he wouldn't have to go out anymore. And I refused to be in the house. And so I would sometimes drive the streets till 3 in the morning with my children, waiting for him to finish so we could go home.
Tell me how much I understand that he was looking at some 15 movies a week.
Right. When we first got the VCR, it was like 2 or 3 movies a week. And after about 6 years, it progressed to over 15 a week. And his whole life was based around when he would find the time to watch the next movie.
And specifically, how did he change?
His whole attitude changed. At the beginning, he was a very sweet, nice person, and the movies that he began watching, he always told me what was in them, even though I never looked at them. And they became more violent, and he became more violent, and he physically abused me and the children and sexually abused me.
And you really believe that was linked to these?
I know it was, because he wasn't like that before, because we'd been married for 4 years and none of this had come up, and then it slowly started getting worse and worse. And finally, after the 9 years, I couldn't take it any longer. I just said, this is it. So I went to my pastor and I told him, I can't take this anymore. I want at least to get a separation. And that's when the pastor finally talked to him and said he needed to make a decision between the pornography or me and my children. And that was on a Friday night, and the next morning he committed suicide. And he just couldn't make a decision. It was too hard for him, because he knew now somebody else knew about his problem, and it's just too hard. When they get used to doing that, they can't just say no more and walk away. It becomes such an addiction that they can't function without it.
Dr. Crenshaw, is this a very unusual case? I mean,
Well, it certainly is for someone to commit suicide over it, but it's not unheard of, as you can see here. And it's awfully important to understand that the situation's a lot more complex than it looks right on the surface, because Ted Bundy couldn't be trusted with the lingerie section of the Sears catalog. There are individuals who are vulnerable, and when exposed at any age to certain material are going to get twisted, it's dangerous to them, and it's going to damage them. And then there are others who can look at Playboy and a variety of what we call soft porn, and it's elective erotic entertainment, and it doesn't twist them or distort them. For some people it's progressive, as in this case, and for others it just stays at one level for a lifetime. So the difficulty is you can't tell in advance who's who.
Who's who. How do you know when it starts to become an addiction, to a point where, because guys and gals buy porn.
Sure. Well,
a clue is if you have to leave the house with your children.
That's a good clue.
You know, so that your
Yeah.
husband can watch the films. I think one of the things that's very typical is when it becomes a perpetual pattern, when it becomes necessary with every sexual encounter, or the majority of them. If that's the case, let it ring alarm bells for you, because that isn't ordinary.
Okay, when we come back, I know you have a question here. We're going to continue with you and ask the question for you at home who may be going through this. What can you do if pornography is getting in the way of a healthy sexual relationship with your mate? We're going to have advice for this and continue our conversation on pornography right after this. Okay, I know that you had a question up here for Valerie.
Yeah, Valerie, you said this started early in your marriage. Didn't you like blow up at him or something and say, throw this stuff out of the house and seek some counseling other than just your minister? You just let it go on? I mean, if my husband had it home, I'd be burning them books, man. I'd be throwing it out. And did you just, how long did it go on?
want to have a failed marriage, for one thing. You know, we want to try our best to do what we can to have a good marriage. We don't like the thought of failure. Another aspect was the fact that I'm a Christian, and you know, the church that I was going to at the time did not believe in divorce, so it wasn't an option for me to just leave. And so I thought I had to just take it and endure whatever came. And so that's why I did that for as long as I did.
I understand, Dr. Crenshaw, that a lot of women who find themselves, and I'm sure there are men who have wives or mates who are involved too much, they feel, with pornography, but a lot of it is embarrassing to seek help. It's hard to say my man is attracted to a woman in a magazine more than he is to me.
Oh, it's humiliating. I mean, first of all, the woman usually feels competitive with whatever the pornography is, as though somebody's lacking in her, as though she's driven into it. And so to go and speak with a total stranger about someone else's problem, or what you perceive as someone else's problem, is an enormous challenge.
And that's one of the things that really bothered me just listening to this, is how this addiction was put on you. Like, this is your problem now because your husband is addicted to pornography.
But you know, one of the interesting things that few people realize is that men and women are so different in their arousal patterns. And men are much more visually aroused than women are. Women are verbally aroused, you know, music and sweet talk and things like this. And so what you'll find, I call it hormones. Men have testosterone levels that are 10 or 11 times higher than ours. They're hormones. And if you think of it that way, it's because it raises their libido, their sex drive. It also makes them irritable and aggressive, and oddly enough makes them want to be alone. So when these testosterone, when these sex hormones spike, a lot of things occur, and visual art, pornography, whatever you call it.
Now, wait a minute. If they already have high testosterone,
yes,
and then they look at a few movies and a few magazines, it goes a little higher.
I have a lot of trouble with defining men and women in terms of hormones. I really have a lot of problem with this. I also think that the way that you even talked about the pornography is problematical, because one of the things that we have to understand is, what does it mean when you have an industry, the pornography industry in this country, which, as you've said, is at least $10 billion a year, socializing our sexuality? And what it means is that the pornographers are socializing what I have, a term that I use, I call it an image-dependent sexuality. And so what happens is that in order for people to be together in an intimate way, they become very connected to an image. Okay, well, that's what a sexy woman looks like. Well, my wife doesn't look like that, or my lover doesn't look like that.
Well,
and
wait
so
a minute. If you listen to Gina,
sexuality,
you can look like Gina and still have a problem.
Yes, it's right. And so let's look at the pornography in that, because the kind of sexuality is a kind of sexuality that is based on objects rather than relationships between people, be it same-sex or heterosexual.
But that's much easier for a man to be attracted to a beautiful image, and whether it's in film or whether it's in picture, he can look at it, put it away. It doesn't talk to him. It doesn't argue with him. It doesn't disagree with him. Okay, so I think that's where the big attraction
part of the escape. So what are men having sex with? Things instead of human beings?
No, of course, it's a complete package, and I think that's,
Well, and we need to look at violence against women in this country, which has reached epidemic proportions, and there are these things are all related.
Okay, I got to take a break. I'm getting big signs over here. I got to take a break. I know you have a question. We'll be right back after this with more on pornography. Video news guy Guide this year says that 19% of adult videotapes rented in general video stores are rented by women with men. So there's some closet women around here looking at porn too. You had a question also.
I'd like to ask the doctor what the implications are for society, and in particular with teenagers and children, because I know what I'm seeing as a classroom teacher, and I've been doing it for 19 years, and there's a definite trend towards much more violence. So I'd like to know your comments.
Well, I think that there's absolutely no place for erotic literature or pornography in our youth. I mean, it's not appropriate. It can do more harm than good. There's no question about that.
Valerie, I'm sorry. Dr. Crenshaw, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you?
No, I just think that by the time someone becomes an adult, and we're looking at the preferences of male and female, if you weigh it, we'd have no harm without pornography, so it's somewhat elective, but you'd have an awful lot of very normal men complaining that their erotic entertainment wasn't available, in the same way that you would if you threw out romance novels, women's erotic entertainment.
Yeah, y'all, because the romance novels, I mean, if you read some of those romance novels, they're pretty steamy. Now, I understand there's some people who say that's porn for women, literature porn.
Address what the school teacher says. Statistics show that the largest consumers of pornography are 12 to 17-year-old boys. And the problem with this is, at such a young age, when they look at this, they develop their whole idea of love, sex, marriage, intimacy, and relationships from what they're looking at. And so they bring that into the marriage relationship. And they have a really hard time showing love and having an intimate relationship and being close with their wives.
I'd have to say one thing, that men have a hard time being verbally intimate anyway. With or without pornography, it's very difficult for them. To express their feelings in words and their emotions is part of what inhibits the relationship between the sexes.
But how do we get them to understand that these are our concerns, that our concern is that we don't want to be looked at as receptacles?
Women have to speak out, first of all. We're much too timid and we're much too vague. And if there's something you want, you have to knock on his psychic door, and you need to do it loudly and repeatedly, because where we are different emotionally and physically and sexually, you're not going to innately understand one another. That's why there's so much confusion about this subject and so much, angst and disagreement. So you need to tell him what you need and what you want, and sometimes show him and be specific.
And I want you to tell me, we got to take a break, and I'm going to continue with your question. I want you also to tell us, when is the point where you start saying, honey, I think it's a little bit much with the magazines, after this? The police officers again during the break, and they were saying, it took us so long as women to get the guys in the precinct to take those porn things out of their locker, and now they got one of the force on the locker. So I understand. What do you think about pornography?
I have nothing against pornography, only because me and my husband, every Friday night, we go to the video store and I pick out the videotape that I want to watch with him so that we can have a great, fantastic evening. And we go for it.
And it works. Okay. I mean, thank you so much. I think that the point is, in any of these things, it isn't all bad or all good. It's whatever your take is on it. But Dr. Crenshaw, what are some things that you would advise or say to us as we say goodbye here?
Well, I think people don't realize that there's really three people in the bedroom: you, him, and the relationship. And anytime either one of you gets uncomfortable with pornography, you've got a problem, whether there's an absolute right or wrong or not. And that's the time to stop judging, start talking, listen and learn, and if that isn't enough, then go see someone.
That's right, that's right. Okay, and the main thing is, have control of your own life. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Rolonda, and everybody, thank you for doing this. Thank you.